The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the quiet streets of Maplewood, a small town where everyone knew each other by name. Life here was simple. Children rode their bikes down tree-lined avenues, elderly couples strolled hand in hand through the park, and neighbors exchanged warm smiles from their porches. It was the kind of place people dreamed of living in, far away from the chaos of big cities. But even in towns like this, trouble sometimes found its way in. Officer Daniels had been patrolling the area for years. He knew every corner, every shortcut, and almost every face. His job wasn't usually exciting, more about keeping an eye out for stray dogs or helping tourists who got lost looking for the local bakery, but he took pride in it. Today felt different, though. As he drove slowly down Elm Street, something caught his attention, a lone figure standing on the sidewalk near the edge of the neighborhood. At first glance, it looked like just another kid, maybe waiting for a friend, or daydreaming after school. But as Officer Daniels slowed his car, he realized there was something unusual about the boy. The child stood perfectly still, clutching a worn-out backpack with both hands. His clothes were dirty, as if he'd been rolling around in the mud and his hair stuck up in messy tufts. Most striking, however, were his eyes. Wide and glassy, they darted nervously back and forth, scanning the street as if searching for someone, or perhaps hiding from someone. Daniels parked his patrol car a few feet away and stepped out cautiously. He didn't want to startle the boy, so he kept his movements slow and deliberate. "Hey there," he said softly, kneeling slightly to appear less intimidating. "Are you okay? Are you lost?" For a moment, the boy didn't respond. He seemed frozen, staring at the officer as though unsure whether to trust him. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the boy opened his mouth. His voice was barely audible, trembling as he whispered 5 words that sent chills down Daniel's spine. They're still in there." Daniels blinked, his mind racing to process what the boy meant. "In where?" he asked gently, leaning closer. But the boy didn't answer right away. Instead, he pointed toward a house 2 blocks away, a weathered, abandoned structure with boarded-up windows and peeling paint. Everyone in town knew that house. It had been empty for years, a relic of a bygone era when the neighborhood was less prosperous. Kids often dared each other to sneak inside, but no one ever stayed long. There were rumors about strange noises coming from within, though most dismissed them as urban legends. But now, staring at the boy's frightened expression, Daniels couldn't shake the feeling that those rumors might hold some truth. Something about the way the boy spoke, the urgency in his tone, the fear in his eyes, told the officer this wasn't just a prank or a childish game. Whatever was happening, it was serious. And whatever they weren't supposed to be there. Daniels reached for his radio, his heart pounding. He needed backup, and he needed it fast. Glancing back at the boy, he noticed how tightly the child clutched his backpack, as if it contained all the answers. "Stay close to me," Daniels said firmly, placing a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder. "You're safe now." The boy nodded hesitantly, but his grip on the backpack didn't loosen. As Daniels called for reinforcements, he couldn't help but wonder, what exactly had this little boy stumbled into, and what would they find when they reached that mysterious house? Officer Daniels couldn't shake the unease that settled over him as he knelt beside the boy. The child's trembling voice and haunted eyes told a story far beyond anything Daniels had encountered in his years on the force. "You're safe now," he repeated, trying to sound calm and reassuring, though his own nerves were beginning to fray. "Can you tell me more about what's going on? Who's still in there?" The boy hesitated, his small frame tense as if bracing for something terrible to happen. For a moment, Daniels thought he might clam up entirely, retreating into silence like so many scared children do when faced with authority figures. But then, slowly, the boy began to speak. His words came out haltingly, pieced together in fragments that painted a chilling picture. "They took me," the boy whispered, his voice barely audible over the rustling leaves in the nearby trees. "I don't know why. They said I had to stay quiet, but last night when it got dark I ran. I didn't look back. He paused, swallowing hard as tears welled up in his eyes. They're gonna be mad. They'll come looking. Daniels felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. Whoever they were, they clearly weren't ordinary criminals. This wasn't a case of mischief or petty theft. It was something darker, more sinister. And yet, despite the fear radiating off the boy, there was also an undeniable spark of courage. Running away must have taken every ounce of bravery the child possessed. "Okay, buddy," Daniels said gently, keeping his tone steady. "We're going to figure this out together. But first, can you show me exactly where you were? Where did you run from?" The boy nodded hesitantly and pointed again toward the dilapidated house 2 blocks away. "That one," he murmured, his voice shaking. "The big, scary house everyone says is haunted." Daniels exchanged a glance with another officer who had arrived on the scene after his call for backup. Both men knew the rumors surrounding the old house, whispers of strange noises, flickering lights at odd hours, and shadowy figures moving behind the boarded-up windows. Most people dismissed these tales as nothing more than ghost stories meant to spook kids during Halloween. But now, standing face to face with a terrified child who claimed to have escaped from within those walls, the legends didn't seem quite so far-fetched. As they waited for additional officers to arrive, Daniels tried to coax more details from the boy. "Did you see anyone else while you were inside?" he asked carefully, not wanting to overwhelm him. "Were there other people with you?" The boy bit his lip, glancing nervously toward the house before answering. "There were others. 3 of them. They didn't talk much, just sat there, tied up. I think they were scared too." His voice trailed off, and he hugged his backpack, closer to his chest as if it offered some kind of protection. Daniel's mind raced. 3 people tied up? That changed everything. If the boy was telling the truth, and Daniels had no reason to doubt him, then they weren't dealing with an empty building or a harmless squatter situation. This was a hostage scenario, and time was of the essence. By now, several patrol cars had pulled up, their flashing lights casting eerie shadows across the street. Neighbors began peeking out of their windows, curious about the commotion. Daniels quickly briefed the arriving officers, emphasizing the need for caution. Whoever was inside that house clearly posed a threat, and rushing in without a plan could put lives at risk. As the team prepared to move toward the house, Daniels turned back to the boy one last time. "You did the right thing by coming to me," he said earnestly, placing a reassuring hand on the child's shoulder. "Now, we're going to make sure nobody gets hurt, okay?" The boy nodded, though his wide eyes betrayed his lingering fear. Daniels gave him a small smile before turning to join his fellow officers. As they approached the ominous structure looming ahead, Daniels couldn't help but feel a mix of dread and determination. The boy had trusted him to fix this, to save the people still trapped inside. Failure wasn't an option. With every step closer to the house, the air grew heavier, charged with tension. Daniels tightened his grip on his flashlight, his heart pounding in anticipation. Whatever awaited them inside, it was clear that this quiet little town was about to face its darkest hour and perhaps its greatest test of courage. The group of officers moved cautiously toward the abandoned house, their boots crunching softly against the gravel path. The building loomed ahead, its broken windows and sagging roof giving it an almost skeletal appearance. It looked like something out of a horror movie, but this wasn't fiction, it was real life. Officer Daniels led the way, his flashlight cutting through the gathering dusk as he scanned the perimeter for any signs of movement. Every creak of the boards underfoot made him flinch, his senses on high alert. As they reached the front door, which hung slightly ajar, Daniels signaled for the team to hold back for a moment. He leaned in close to the gap, listening intently. At first, there was nothing. Just the faint hum of insects buzzing nearby and the distant chirping of crickets. But then, ever so faintly, he heard it. Muffled voices coming from somewhere deep, inside the house. They were too indistinct to make out words, but the tone was unmistakable, fearful, urgent, strained. Daniels turned to his fellow officers, his face grim. "We've got people inside," he whispered, his voice low but firm. "Let's move carefully, we don't know what we're walking into." With that, the team prepared to enter. One officer stepped forward with a battering ram, ready to force the door open if necessary. But before they could act, the sound of footsteps echoed from within the house. Heavy, deliberate steps. Someone or something was approaching. For a split second, everyone froze. Daniels tightened his grip on his flashlight, his other hand hovering near his holster. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until finally a figure appeared in the doorway. It was a man, tall and broad-shouldered, with wild eyes and a scowl that sent shivers down their spines. His clothes were disheveled, and he carried a crowbar loosely in one hand, as though he hadn't expected company. "Who are you?" The man barked, his voice rough and menacing. "What do you want?" Daniels stepped forward, raising his hand slightly to show he meant no harm, at least not yet. "We're police officers," he said evenly, his tone calm but authoritative. "We received a report about someone being held here against their will. Is that true?" The man's eyes narrowed, flickering between the officers as if assessing whether he could take them all on. For a moment it seemed like he might lunge at them, but instead he let out a bitter laugh. "You think I'm stupid enough to answer that? Get off my property before you regret it." Daniels didn't flinch. "Sir, we have reason to believe there are hostages inside. Step aside, or we'll have to remove you." The man sneered, tightening his grip on the crowbar. "Try it," he growled, taking a step forward. Without hesitation, Daniels signaled to his team. Two officers rushed the man, tackling him to the ground before he could react. The struggle was brief but intense. He thrashed and shouted obscenities, but the officers quickly subdued him, securing his wrists with handcuffs. As they dragged him away, Daniels exhaled sharply, realizing just how close they'd come to disaster. But there was no time to dwell on it. With the first threat neutralized, the team pushed further into the house. The interior was even more decrepit than it appeared from the outside. Dust coated every surface and the air smelled musty, like decades of neglect had seeped into the walls. Broken furniture lay scattered across the rooms, and graffiti covered the peeling wallpaper. It was hard to imagine anyone living here let alone keeping hostages. They moved silently, their flashlights slicing through the darkness. Each room they checked was empty, heightening the tension. Where were the others? Had the boy been mistaken? Or worse, had whoever was holding them already fled? Then, as they climbed the rickety staircase to the second floor, they heard it again. Voices. This time, clearer, more desperate. Following the sound, they found themselves in a cramped bedroom at the end of the hallway. Inside, 3 people sat huddled together, bound with rope and gagged with cloth. Their faces lit up with relief when they saw the officers, tears streaming down their cheeks as they realized help had finally arrived. Daniels knelt beside them, his heart breaking at the sight. "It's okay," he said softly, cutting the ropes with his knife. "You're safe now." One of the victims, a young woman, gasped for breath as she tried to speak. "Thank you. Thank you," she stammered, her voice hoarse. "We thought no one would find us," Daniels nodded, helping her to her feet. As the team escorted the victims outside, he couldn't help but glance back at the darkened hallway. There was still so much they didn't know. How long these people had been held captive, who else might be involved, and why this place had been chosen. But one thing was certain. The bravery of a little boy had saved their lives. Back outside, the boy watched anxiously as the victims were led to safety. When he saw them emerge, his shoulders sagged with visible relief. Daniels walked over to him, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You did good, kid," he said warmly. "Real good." The boy managed a small smile, clutching his backpack tightly. Though the danger was over, Daniels knew the scars of this ordeal would linger, for the victims, for the town, and especially for the boy who had risked everything to seek help. As the officers escorted the 3 victims out of the house, the gravity of the situation began to sink in. The victims, 2 men and a woman, looked exhausted, their faces pale and drawn, their eyes hollow with fear. They stumbled slightly as they walked, their legs unsteady from days, maybe weeks, of being confined. One of them, a middle-aged man, with scruffy hair and a bruised cheek, leaned heavily on an officer's arm for support. Another, the young woman who had spoken earlier, clutched a blanket around her shoulders, trembling despite the warm evening air. The third, an older man with deep lines etched into his face, stared straight ahead, almost as if he were still trapped in some unseen nightmare. Officer Daniels watched them closely, his heart aching at the sight. These weren't just random strangers. They were people who had families, lives, dreams that had been cruelly interrupted. He couldn't help but wonder what horrors they had endured while locked away in that dark, decrepit house. What threats had they faced? How close had they come to losing hope entirely? Once outside, the victims were guided to waiting ambulances, where paramedics immediately began tending to their injuries. Blankets were wrapped around them, water bottles pressed into their hands, and soothing words whispered to calm their frazzled nerves. Despite the care they received, it was clear that their recovery would take time, not just physically but emotionally. Trauma like this didn't simply vanish overnight. Daniels approached the young woman whose name he learned was Sarah and knelt beside her stretcher. "Can you tell me what happened?" he asked gently, careful not to push too hard. "Anything you remember will help us understand." Sarah hesitated, glancing nervously at the other victims before speaking. Her voice was soft, barely above a whisper, but every word carried the weight of unspeakable fear. They grabbed us off the street," she said haltingly. "We didn't even see it coming. One minute we were walking home and the next, we woke up here. They said we were leverage, bargaining chips for something bigger, but they never told us what." Daniels frowned, jotting down notes in his pocket-sized notebook. Leverage. Bargaining chips. This wasn't a random kidnapping. It was part of something larger, more calculated. Whoever was behind this had planned carefully, using these innocent people as pawns in a dangerous game. And the boy, the brave little boy who had escaped, had somehow become entangled in it all. "What about the others?" Daniels asked, nodding toward the two men sitting nearby. "Do you know how long you've been here?" Sarah shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes again. "It felt like forever. Days blurred together. We tried to keep track by marking the walls, but..." She trailed off, shuddering as if reliving the memory. "They kept us tied up most of the time. Barely fed us. They'd come in once a day to check on us, but they didn't talk much. Just made sure we knew we couldn't leave." Daniels nodded, piecing the story together in his mind. The captors had clearly gone to great lengths to isolate their victims, cutting them off from the outside world completely. No phones, no windows without boards, no way to signal for help. It was a miracle the boy had managed to escape at all, and that he'd had the courage to seek out the police. Meanwhile, the team secured the scene, combing through the house for clues. Inside, they found evidence of the captors' presence: discarded food wrappers, makeshift sleeping areas, and a pile of ropes and gags identical to those used on the victims. In one corner of the main room, they discovered a stack of documents, handwritten notes, maps, and lists of names scrawled in hurried handwriting. It seemed the kidnappers weren't lone wolves acting on impulse. They were part of an organized operation, possibly linked to a larger criminal network. Back outside, Daniels turned his attention back to the boy, who stood quietly near the patrol car, watching everything unfold. His small frame looked even smaller now, dwarfed by the chaos surrounding him. Daniels walked over and crouched down to meet him at eye level. "You did amazing today," he said sincerely, his voice filled with admiration. "Because of you, we saved those people. You're a hero." The boy blinked, surprised by the praise. For so long. The morning after the rescue, the small town of Maplewood buzzed with a mix of shock and gratitude. News of the abandoned house and the dramatic rescue spread quickly, turning what had once been a quiet neighborhood into the center of attention. Neighbors gathered on sidewalks, sharing hushed conversations about the events of the previous night. Parents hugged their children a little tighter as they sent them off to school, while others expressed relief that the danger had been uncovered before it could escalate further. At the police station, the atmosphere was tense but focused. Investigators worked tirelessly to piece together the puzzle of who was behind the kidnapping operation. The documents found in the house provided crucial leads, names, locations, and cryptic references that hinted at a larger criminal network involved in human trafficking. It became clear that the victims weren't chosen randomly. They were targeted because of connections to rival groups or individuals who owed debts. The boy, Ethan, had likely been taken by mistake, snatched during a moment of panic when his captors realized they needed another hostage to strengthen their leverage. Officer Daniels spent hours interviewing the victims, learning more about their ordeal and the people who had held them captive. Sarah, the young woman, recalled how her captors spoke in low, hurried tones about delivering them somewhere soon. She described one man in particular, a tall, wiry figure with tattoos covering his arms, who seemed to be the leader of the group. Another victim, the older man named Tom, remembered overhearing arguments between the kidnappers, suggesting internal conflict within their ranks. These details might have seemed minor, but to the investigators they were vital threads in unraveling the case. Meanwhile, Ethan remained at the heart of the story. Social workers arrived to ensure he was safe and cared for, arranging temporary housing until his family could be located. To everyone's surprise, Ethan didn't have any immediate relatives nearby. His parents had passed away years earlier, and he had been living with a distant aunt who was currently traveling abroad. For now, he stayed with a foster family known to the community, kind-hearted people who promised to give him the stability and support he desperately needed. Despite everything he'd been through, Ethan showed remarkable resilience. When asked to recount his escape, he spoke clearly and confidently, as though reliving those terrifying moments gave him strength rather than fear. He explained how he had memorized the layout of the house during his captivity, timing the guards, movements, and waiting for the perfect opportunity to slip away. On the night he fled, chaos had erupted inside the house. A heated argument among the kidnappers distracted them long enough for him to break free. Once outside, he ran blindly through the streets until he spotted Officer Daniels's patrol car. As the investigation deepened, authorities began connecting the dots between this local incident and broader criminal activities spanning multiple states. The names scribbled on the recovered documents matched those of known traffickers wanted by federal agencies. This revelation elevated the case from a local matter to a national priority, drawing in resources from higher levels of law enforcement. Detective Harris, the lead investigator, briefed Daniels on the developments, emphasizing the importance of keeping Ethan safe. "This kid is our key witness," Harris said firmly. "If these guys find out he talked to us, they won't hesitate to come after him." Daniels nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle heavily on his shoulders. Protecting Ethan wasn't just part of his job, it was personal now. Over the next few days, he visited the boy regularly, checking in not only to gather more information but also to offer comfort and reassurance. During one visit, Ethan surprised him by pulling something out of his backpack, a crumpled photograph of his late parents. "I kept it hidden under my shirt," he said quietly. "It reminded me I had to keep fighting. For them." Daniels felt a lump rise in his throat. In that moment, he realized Ethan wasn't just a brave child. He was a symbol of hope, proof that even in the darkest times, courage could shine through. As he left the foster home that evening, Daniels made a silent promise to himself. No matter what it took, he would see this case through to the end. Justice would be served, not just for Ethan and the rescued victims, but for every innocent person caught in the shadow of such evil. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Arrest warrants were issued, raids planned, and alliances formed with federal agencies. But as dawn broke over Maplewood once again, casting soft light over its sleepy streets, there was a renewed sense of purpose in the air. The town had faced darkness, and thanks to the bravery of a little boy and the dedication of its officers, it had emerged stronger than ever. The investigation into the kidnapping ring quickly escalated from a local police matter to a full-blown, multi-agency operation. Federal agents arrived in Maplewood within days, their presence transforming the small town's usually calm atmosphere into one of controlled urgency. Detective Harris and Officer Daniels worked closely with the newcomers, sharing every detail they had uncovered so far. The documents seized from the abandoned house were sent off for analysis, revealing connections to a sprawling network involved in human trafficking, extortion, and illegal smuggling operations across several states. For Ethan, life began to settle into a new rhythm, though it was anything but ordinary. The foster family he stayed with, Mr. and Mrs. Harper, were warm and patient, doing their best to make him feel at home. They cooked his favorite meals, encouraged him to play outside with their dog, Max, and even let him pick out books from the library to read before bed. But despite their kindness, Ethan couldn't shake the memories of what he'd been through. Nightmares plagued him, waking him up in cold sweats as fragments of his captivity replayed in his mind. During the day, he tried to act like any other kid, but his eyes often drifted toward windows or doors as if expecting danger to reappear at any moment. Officer Daniels noticed this during his visits. He made it a point to stop by regularly, not just to check on Ethan's safety, but also to remind him that he wasn't alone. "You're stronger than you think," Daniels told him one afternoon as they sat together in the Harpers' backyard. "What you did, it takes real guts. Most adults wouldn't have the courage to do what you did." Ethan shrugged, kicking at the grass with his sneakers. "I just wanted to help," he said softly, repeating the same words he'd spoken the night of the rescue. "I didn't want anyone else to get hurt." Daniels smiled, ruffling the boy's hair affectionately. "Well, you did more than help. You saved lives. Those people are safe because of you." As the weeks passed, the case grew bigger and more complex. Authorities identified the man with the crowbar, the one arrested outside the house, as a low-level enforcer named Greg Porter. Under intense questioning, Porter eventually cracked, spilling details about the inner workings of the operation. He revealed that the group was part of a larger syndicate known as the Black Vipers, notorious for preying on vulnerable individuals and using them as leverage in criminal disputes. The victims rescued from the house had been intended as bargaining chips in a high-stakes negotiation involving rival gangs. Porter's confession led to a series of raids targeting other suspected hideouts linked to the Black Vipers. Dozens of arrests were made, including several high-ranking members of the organization. Each arrest brought investigators closer to dismantling the entire network, but it also raised concerns about retaliation. Detective Harris warned Daniels that Ethan remained at risk, especially since his escape had exposed critical weaknesses in the syndicate's plans. To ensure Ethan's safety, the police implemented strict protective measures. Officers patrolled the Harpers' neighborhood around the clock, and Ethan was given a special emergency number to call if he ever felt threatened. The Harpers themselves were briefed on security protocols, learning how to identify suspicious behavior and respond quickly in case of trouble. Despite these precautions, Daniels knew the emotional scars would take longer to heal. One evening, while tucking Ethan into bed, Mrs. Harper overheard him whispering to himself, "They won't come back. They can't." Her heart broke hearing those words, but she chose to focus on the progress he was making. Slowly but surely, Ethan was beginning to trust again. Back at the station, Daniels and Harris pored over maps and files, piecing together the final stages of the operation. They knew bringing down the Black Vipers wouldn't be easy. They were dealing with seasoned criminals who didn't hesitate to use violence to protect their interests. But every lead they followed, every suspect they apprehended, brought them one step closer to justice. As the sun set over Maplewood, casting long shadows across its quiet streets, Daniels allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. This case had tested him in ways he hadn't anticipated, forcing him to confront the darker corners of humanity. Yet it had also shown him the power of courage and resilience, embodied by a little boy who refused to give up. No matter what challenges lay ahead, Daniels vowed to see this through. Not just for Ethan, but for everyone who deserved to live free from fear. And somewhere deep inside, he believed they were winning. Weeks turned into months, and the once quiet town of Maplewood slowly began to feel like itself again. The initial shock of the kidnapping case had faded, replaced by a cautious optimism as news of the arrests spread. The Black Vipers network was crumbling under the weight of relentless investigations, with authorities dismantling their operations piece by piece. Every raid, every captured suspect, brought a renewed sense of safety to the community. People who had been afraid to leave their homes after dark now felt comfortable strolling through the park or chatting with neighbors late into the evening. For Ethan, life continued to improve, though the scars of his ordeal remained. He attended therapy sessions twice a week, where he learned coping strategies to deal with the nightmares and anxiety that still lingered. His foster parents, Mr. and Mrs. Harper, supported him every step of the way, celebrating small victories like the first time he laughed during a family game night or the day he agreed to join a local youth soccer team. Though Ethan was still reserved around strangers, he began opening up more to those closest to him, especially Officer Daniels. Daniels had become a constant presence in Ethan's life, visiting him regularly not just as a protector but also as a friend. Their bond grew stronger with each passing week, built on trust and mutual respect. One Saturday afternoon, Daniels took Ethan fishing at a nearby lake, a simple activity that turned out to be surprisingly therapeutic for both of them. As they sat side by side on the dock casting their lines into the water, Ethan finally opened up about his feelings. "I used to think I'd never feel safe again," Ethan admitted, staring at the ripples spreading across the surface of the lake. "But now, I don't know. It's getting better." Daniels nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "That's good to hear," he said gently. "You've been through something most people can't even imagine. But look how far you've come." Ethan shrugged, though there was a hint of pride in his expression. "I guess I'm tougher than I thought." "You're braver than anyone." "I know," Daniels replied honestly. "And you've got a lot of people rooting for you, including me." Meanwhile, the investigation reached its climax. Federal agents working alongside local law enforcement identified the mastermind behind the Black Vipers, a ruthless crime boss named Victor Kane. Known for his cunning tactics and iron grip on his organization, Kane had evaded capture for years, operating from the shadows. But thanks to the evidence gathered during the raids and Ethan's testimony, he could no longer hide. The final showdown came one chilly autumn morning when authorities surrounded a remote cabin deep in the woods. Intelligence reports suggested Kane was holed up there, planning his next move. Armed with warrants and backup teams, officers stormed the property, arresting Kane without incident. Inside the cabin, they found stacks of cash, weapons, and detailed plans outlining future crimes. It was clear Kane had intended to expand his operation, targeting even more innocent lives if left unchecked. News of Kane's arrest sent shockwaves through the criminal underworld, effectively crippling the Black Vipers' influence. For the residents of Maplewood, it marked the end of a long and harrowing chapter. A sense of peace returned to the town, allowing people to focus on rebuilding what had been disrupted. As winter approached, Maplewood decided to honor those who had played key roles in bringing justice to the victims. A ceremony was held at the town hall, attended by hundreds of grateful citizens. Ethan was invited to speak, though he opted to stay seated beside Daniels instead, gripping his hand tightly, as applause filled the room. When Daniels stepped forward to accept an award on behalf of the police department, he made sure to acknowledge Ethan's bravery. "This wouldn't have been possible without a little boy who refused to stay silent," Daniels said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Ethan reminded us all that even in the darkest moments, courage can shine through. He's our hero." The crowd erupted in cheers, many wiping away tears as they clapped. Ethan ducked his head shyly, unused to being the center of attention, but Daniels gave his shoulder a reassuring squeeze. "You deserve this," he whispered. In the months that followed, Ethan continued to thrive. With the support of his foster family and Daniels, he embraced his new life, finding joy in school, sports, and friendships. The nightmares became less frequent, replaced by dreams of brighter days ahead. And while the memories of his captivity would always be part of him, they no longer defined him. For Officer Daniels, the case changed him too. It reinforced his belief in the power of community, courage, and compassion. Every patrol route he drove reminded him of the boy who had risked everything to seek help, and how one act of bravery could ripple outward, touching countless lives. Maplewood wasn't perfect, it never would be, but it was stronger because of what it had endured. Together, its people had faced fear and emerged victorious, proving that even in the face of darkness, light could prevail. Months after the dramatic events that shook Maplewood, life in the small town settled into a rhythm of quiet gratitude. The Black Vipers were no longer a shadow looming over the community. Their leader, Victor Kane, was behind bars, and his network had been dismantled piece by piece. The once abandoned house where Ethan and the other victims had been held was boarded up even more securely now, its windows painted over with warnings to keep trespassers away. For many residents, it served as a stark reminder of how close they had come to tragedy, and how far they had come since then. Ethan, now thriving in his foster home with the Harpers, began to embrace the idea of a normal childhood again. He excelled in school, earned praise from his teachers for his sharp mind and determination, and even scored a goal during a soccer game, much to the delight of his teammates and Mr. Harper, who cheered loudly from the sidelines. Though he still carried the weight of his past experiences, Ethan found solace in the love and support surrounding him. His friendship with Officer Daniels remained a cornerstone of his recovery, providing him with guidance and encouragement whenever he needed it. Daniels, too, felt a profound sense of fulfillment. This case had tested him in ways he hadn't anticipated, forcing him to confront the darker aspects of human nature. But it had also shown him the incredible resilience of the human spirit, embodied by a little boy who refused to give up. Every time Daniels saw Ethan smile or laugh, he was reminded of why he had chosen this line of work: to protect people and make a difference, no matter how daunting the odds might seem, to honor the bravery displayed during those harrowing days. The town decided to erect a memorial near the abandoned house. A plaque was placed under a sturdy oak tree, its inscription reading, "In memory of courage and hope, dedicated to Ethan and all those who refused to stay silent." On the day of the unveiling, townsfolk gathered to pay their respects, sharing stories of how the rescue had restored their faith in humanity. Ethan stood quietly beside Daniels, holding Mrs. Harper's hand as tears welled up in his eyes, not out of sadness, but pride. Afterward, Daniels took Ethan aside and handed him a small journal. "I want you to write down your thoughts," he said with a warm smile. "Good days, bad days, it doesn't matter, just get them out. You've got so much wisdom for someone your age, and I think writing will help you process everything." Ethan accepted the gift with wide eyes, hugging it close to his chest. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. It wasn't just a notebook. It was a symbol of trust, growth, and the belief that his voice mattered. As time passed, Maplewood transformed in subtle yet meaningful ways. Neighbors looked out for one another more closely. Schools introduced programs to teach children about safety and speaking up, and local authorities implemented new measures to prevent similar incidents from happening again. The town emerged, stronger, united by shared adversity and triumph. For Daniels, the experience reinforced his commitment to protecting others. He continued patrolling the streets of Maplewood, always vigilant, always ready to lend a helping hand. And though he encountered countless cases big and small, none stayed with him quite like Ethan's. Those 5 whispered words, "They're still in there," had sparked a chain reaction that saved lives, brought justice, and reminded everyone of the power of courage. Years later, when Ethan grew older and reflected on his journey, he realized something important. Bravery wasn't about being fearless. It was about acting despite fear, choosing to fight for what was right even when the odds seemed impossible. That lesson stayed with him throughout his life, shaping him into a compassionate and resilient young man. And so, the legacy of that fateful day lived on, not just in the hearts of those directly involved, but in the fabric of the town itself. Maplewood became a place where people knew they could rely on each other, where acts of kindness rippled outward like waves, and where even the smallest voices could spark monumental change. Through darkness, light had emerged. Through fear, courage had prevailed. And through silence, a little boy's whisper had changed everything, for the better.